I want to backtrack a little bit because you got out of the monastery, you did construction work, other random jobs, post office, and then you got into the police academy, correct?
Yes.
And you started doing that. What I'm curious about is your social interactions in this time, especially with women, because that's really a big symbol of jumping back into the world, and I think a very attractive thing that can pull you off the path, but it seems like you were doing all of it: human work, spiritual work, and social type interactions.
Yes. And there was the social component, which was a smaller part. Much of my social need was satisfied in the early months of police work because I had relationships with people and I was meeting women, but there was one woman who I had, of course, met in the monastery, who is now in my life outside the monastery, who I dated cursorily and sometimes more than that. But as I did that, as I related to her, I was less and less enthralled with continuing the relationship. It was becoming clear to me that this was not going to work.
Which is interesting because you continued it.
I did continue it in spite of the fact that I was moving away from this woman more and more, and she was feeling it. But I was being kind of true to myself by doing that. What I didn't realize was how much compulsion there was to save and rescue. Going to police work was an example of that. That's rescue, save, right? Protect, serve. And so I was doing that in general in the community in Illinois, but I was also doing it privately,
So
one-on-one in my relationships with women.
So you weren't really that compelled or interested in your relationships with women, but you felt like you needed to take care of them.
I did, and I wasn't that interested, but it was not bad. The relationships were interesting and fun at times, but the relationship that was more exclusive with one woman, I don't need to mention her name, with one woman, was increasingly difficult and impositional on me, and so I was withdrawing from it. And the more I withdrew, the more insecure and disturbed she became.
And so, as you were withdrawing and she was becoming more disturbed, you decided to get married.
There was a time when she reached a point where she disappeared, and I was concerned about her. And I went looking for her to find her because she just vanished. And I found her in a state that was, I'm not going to talk about, which was not good. I pulled her out of that state and agreed then to continue my relationship with her. And that was where I was not true to myself.
How did that feel? Like, did you feel a stronger sense of you violating yourself, or did you feel like, this is just my work, this is what I do, I save people?
That is what I felt. This is what I do. I will help people out of their trouble. And in fact, if that includes having a relationship, I'm big enough to do that. And so I did.
So would you say that you were kind of faking it in a way? Because, yeah, when you're with someone close like that, I imagine that you would have to kind of fake some affection or, I don't know, anything.
Let's
like
correct
that.
the word faking it. I tuned myself to dealing with that, just as I did with anything else. In police work, people to save that were in bad situations where I go in with a gun and face it. Police officers don't run away. You find people run away from gunfire. I ran toward the gunfire. And so you see, I could relate that to my life with her, with this particular woman in this case. I went toward the trouble. Let's fix it. And I'm big enough to handle fixing it.
So looking at it now, with what you know and what you do, counseling people in these very types of situations, like about sacrificing who you are versus what needs to be done, controlling your ego, all of that type of stuff. Do you I know that at the time you thought you were doing the right thing, but do you think now, looking back at it, that that was what you were supposed to do?
Both may be true. I wouldn't do it again. But it was also growthful in the sense that I learned a lot from it, and I gained strength, I gained gradual strength to be more true to myself. Learned many things in the experiences I was having, like Polonius's words, "This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow, as night follows the day, thou cannot be false to any man." Those kinds of learnings were becoming more important in my life, and hence, of course, they did work of just a couple years later, where I did wind up getting divorced from this woman that I had married in violation of myself earlier than that.
Yeah, so what's the ratio of script to I can handle it, this is what I need to do?
Today?
No, then. Well, then and today.
Then the ratio was pretty much against the truth, even though I saw it as the way to be a rescuer. I saw it as a way to rescue. And I was a rescuer. I still am a rescuer. Only the large R rescuer is turned down to the small and smaller and smaller R to rescue, which is legitimate. Rescuing someone is a legitimate thing to do. But is it the right thing to do at what cost to oneself and the community?
So when you decided to get married, was it like she was like, please marry me, or did you propose just because you felt like that was what you needed to do to help her?
It was heavier than that. It was that she could not live without me and would not want to live.
And so you decided to propose?
I decided not to propose. I decided to go along with marriage.
Oh, so she had asked you before and you said no?
Yes.
Oh. And then you said, okay, fine.
Yes. And against all logic, she accepted that. I think today, who would accept that kind of an agreement?
Like, okay, fine, I'll do it. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So when you were actually getting married, like the day of, what did it feel like?
The day of my actual marriage in the Catholic Church was not a good day for me, because I was going with a smile to the altar, saying to myself, you know this is not what you want to do. So I was hearing that meta voice in me that is very powerful today. I was hearing it in the background saying, you know this is wrong.
Flee, fool.
Flee, fool. Yeah, I didn't have Gandalf then to wake me up and hit me on the head with his staff and say, flee, fool, you want to be white, you're still gray, and you want to be white. Flee, fool, and be truthful. And it wasn't a matter of fleeing, it was a matter of being truthful and saying, this is wrong, you know it, I know it. But that lasted 4 years.
4 years?
Yeah.
How did it kind of come to an end? Were you finally just like, all right, this is enough, I'm not going to be able to save you no matter what I do?
Yeah, there were circumstances that arose that were more and more telling and more untenable, more and more difficult for me to handle in relationship like that. You would imagine that. Started almost immediately.
Well, I guess like my question is, what woke you up that you were like, okay, I can't take this on?
Many things. I don't want to go into them too much because I'm not here to disparage or discount.
No, just in terms of your growth and your development. What woke you up to what you were doing? Not necessarily what she was doing, but what you were doing.
Violating my inclinations that were good inclinations. Compromising my preferences 100%. increasing encroachment of that kind of violation of my own preferences and my own enjoyments, enduring accusations that my sports were taking away from more time with her. And of course my sports, even in monastic life, were very important, powerfully important for me. So it finally came to a head, and I communicated that and said, I'm ending this.
What did it mean to you to be married? Did it change the way that you did things, looked at things, anything, or was...
Yes, it was marriage. I didn't think of it that way, but marriage, practically, for all practical purposes, became a means to serve someone else's demands and preferences.
A lot of people do not look at marriage by those terms.
It was a means to have a relationship that was like the other people in the world did, like everybody else did. Everybody's giving and taking in marriage. Funny, I come from a background of Jesus, and studying the scriptures of Jesus saying, giving and taking in marriage is not where you're going. That's not what it's about. You make a mistake when you think that's what it's about. And knowing that, and still then being lost in the mire of that kind of behavior, giving and taking in marriage, making children, making sure that the children have everything they need, and moving them toward entitlement.
Well, yeah, we live in a really different world now where most people that are married, it's pretty, I'd like to think, it's more equalized. But at the time, were you like the sole provider?
No, this woman was a nurse. She was professional. She made money on her own. Yet she was carrying heavy, dramatic messages from her childhood, her rather traumatic childhood, that she was bringing to the relationship as well, which caused us to really disconnect.
Yeah, I can never imagine you being the type to be like, no, let's work it out when you argue or something. But what was that like actually in it when there were problems, you taking on the kind of rescuer card? What was that like? Were you her teacher in a way? When you would have a disagreement, were you trying to help her through it? Were you like you are now, like, you deal with that, it's not my thing to take on? What was it like?
Well, I was teacher to her, but as the marriage happened, then we were seen as equal, and she treated me that way, as she knew as much as I did, and ran her life her own way. But the problem was that many of the things that she wanted and the way she ran her life had to do with me making adjustments in my life to do that, and to make adjustments in my police work, make adjustments in my continuing education, make adjustments in my sports life, make adjustments in the way I thought about relationship, until I reached a point, a crescendo, where I said, I quit. I quit. And today I quit, and that I'm moving toward a divorce. I'm moving toward separation from you, as kindly as I could. And of course that created immense trouble.
I was going to say, when you said that, what was the reaction?
The reaction was non-acceptance. So that was a long year of divorce, which was a horror I would not, for me anyway, and I think for her as well, a horror that I would not want to ever repeat.